Good afternoon, YouTube. This is your girl, Alex Chick, coming to you for another financial literacy video. Today, we're not going to talk small business. Today, we're going to talk home buying and home ownership. As of April 20th, 2021, I am a first-time homeowner. And so I'm super excited about sharing that process with you as the landscape for home buying looks entirely different than it did in 2020 and in 2019. So I'm definitely interested in equipping you with some most current information as it relates to the home buying landscape right now and what a lot of us are facing across the country. But before we get started, I would first like for you to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share it all around to anybody that may be going through the same process and need some additional insight. So I'm super excited, like I said, so let's go ahead and jump in and get forward. So I want to start out with when you are first looking at home buying, I would say step one needs to be to evaluate your finances. And so what does that entail? Making sure that you have adequate savings, household savings. And this is whether you're buying or renting from my book. Making sure that you have adequate savings. Prior to COVID, the standard was 36 months. I personally recommend having 1 year of living expenses saved up aside from any other, emergency fund that you have. And then also just being proactive, making sure that you have closing costs secured. And I'll get more into this as we go a little bit further. But I will tell you in 2021, most sellers are not paying closing costs. We're in a high, very heavy seller's market. And so sellers get to tell you what to do. And so with that, a lot of buyers are having to pay their own closing costs. So also, like I said, we'll get more into that as we go further. And then also looking at your budget, your monthly budget, go ahead and develop your maximum budget on living expenses. That'll be good to set aside, and we'll get there later. And then also focus on your desired monthly payment for your mortgage and principal and interest. So go ahead. Those are some numbers that I want you to start kind of tabulating in your head. Write them down, jot them down. And as we go forward, you'll see why I focused on that. So step one that I went through in the mortgage process was back in March of 2020. I went ahead and I got pre-qualified, not pre-approved, but pre-qualified. You have some lenders who use those terms interchangeably, but they are actually different processes. Typically, a pre-approval is where they're just going by whatever you tell them. You say, hey, my income is this, hey, my debt is this, and hey, my credit is roughly this. And they give you a rough estimate of what you will be approved for when it comes to lending. I would like to emphasize rough estimate and what you would be approved for lending. A pre-qualification, however, to me is a stronger document that gives you what you need to know going forward. So with a pre-qualification, yes, they are asking you that same information, but they also want you to prove it. So in that process, they are typically asking for pay stubs. If you're a small business owner, any documents to support your business revenue. They're asking to pull your credit. They're at a pre-qual stage. They're asking to pull your credit so they can actually assess where you fall in credit categorization. And so they're asking for all of this proof of income, proof of employment, things like that. So when you usually get a pre-qualification, that's your number. They're telling you that contingent upon everything else in an ideal world, this is what we will be able to lend you for the cost of your house. And so usually they give you a ceiling, not unless you specifically ask for a specific amount. So if you saw a house that you like and it's only $250 and all you asked for was $250, then usually that letter will just say $250. But I would highly encourage you for you to go ahead and depending on, so right now where we are, like I said, it's a very, very heavy, strong seller's market. So that kind of goes back to when I said evaluating your finances. Think about what your max. Think about your max, like where you don't want to just jump to your max, but where you'd be the most comfortable if you had to go higher. What's your ceiling? What's your cap? And so I would highly encourage that when you are shopping around with these lenders to get pre-qualified, that you are giving them all the same number. If your absolute max is $250, tell them all that you want to see numbers for $250. Why do I say that? It's because you want to compare apples to apples. And so if one lender is showing you pre-qual for $200, one's showing you $250, one's showing you $300, how can you really equate what you're actually paying when it comes down to closing costs? Because all of it is factored in based on the actual selling price. So I would highly encourage you, like when you do your research on your lenders, that you look at apples and apples, oranges and oranges, and you're making sure that you're requesting the same thing about lenders and you're providing all the same information to those lenders. So I said lenders, plural. So with that, I did a pre-call with 3 different mortgage companies. And because of that, the reason why I did that is so that I can see, you know, kind of shop around, see what's out there. The same way with the auto loan, you usually don't get the first one that you like. You shop around and see who has the best rate. You definitely want to do the same thing when it comes to pursuing a mortgage. You want to shop around. Yes, they all result in a credit inquiry. However, within 14 days, creditors view all of those inquiries as the same as you're in the house hunting phase. And so, yes, you will have multiple inquiries, but after a while, they stop impacting your score. And if you're looking to buy a house, that's all you should really be focusing on at that time, is purchasing a house. So you don't want to be out here applying for credit cards, buying cars, anything that's going to reflect on your credit. You don't want your credit to change from the day you start the process until the day you close. You don't want anything going on in that mix, because it confuses things, and then you have to provide a lot of justification that you're probably going to be irritated having to provide. And so, yes, shopping around. And so with that, so when I say it's a very strong seller's market, I'm saying that essentially buyers don't have a lot of options. So you may have heard the phrasing about inventory being low. The number of houses that are out and available for purchase is way smaller than the number of people that are trying to buy. So that's that whole economics thing, supply and demand, that we learn about. Right now it's happening. The demand is high, the supply is low. And so when you see that flip-flop like that, you're going to see prices be a little more competitive and be a little higher. And so that's kind of where we are right now. And so in that process of you shopping around with your lenders, asking very clear questions of these lenders: how long are you taking to close? And what is close? Closing is the process that the lender has to go through to get all your paperwork in order and all that kind of stuff. So closing is essentially from the day you are in an executed contract that you facilitate and the seller signs and agrees to the day that you get the keys in your hand. That period right there, your contract period. So you want to know how quickly lenders close. So I will say, out of the 3 lenders that I looked at, one straight up, they told me 45 days. I was like, that ain't gonna work, because again, these buyers have a lot of options right now. Sellers have a lot of options right now. So if a seller does not have to wait 45 days, they won't. So you don't want to put yourself at a disadvantage by using a particular lender if you don't have to, and then end up waiting and potentially losing out on your house. Excuse me. And so the one that said 45 days, when I got their estimate to close was cheaper than the others, even though they said 45 days. So I was like, how can we make this work? So with that, what I ended up doing was I got the lender that told me they could close in 30 days with the second highest price. They said that they would match the lender that had the lowest price but longer closing time. I'll go into that a little bit more. I'm not recommending any lenders, which is why I'm not saying any of them by name. But yeah, I'll circle back to that at the end. And so the next step I would say is determining your housing needs and what you can afford. So yes, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning when I said evaluating finances, when I said look at your maximum budget, your desired monthly payment. So when I say determine your housing needs and what you can afford, that means, do you want a single family house? Do you want a condo? Do you want a townhouse? Do you want a duplex, a triplex? Determining what do you need physically in the house. So starting my search, like I said, I started last year, March 2020. I did my first pre-qualification. I knew I wasn't ready to buy yet, but I kind of wanted to see where I fell as far as what I'd be able to obtain. So it was just, to give myself a good understanding and leverage to where I can go. And so with that, I established some things that were important to me. I've had foot surgery. So with that, I'm like, I really don't want a house with stairs. I can do stairs, but I know about in 5-10 more years, they're not going to be my friend. And so ideally I was looking for a ranch home. with no stairs. And if I did have stairs, it would just be to a bonus room, nowhere I had to go. And so that was literally ideally what I was looking for. And so that's one thing. Another thing is, where do you work, or however you make your income? If it's outside of the household, how close is that home to where you need to be every day? I'll tell you straight up, I'm in Atlanta. That matters here. It might not matter so much other places where your commute is pretty much consistent no matter what time of the day. In Atlanta, not is out of the question. Like literally 10 minutes will make the difference of if you're sitting in an hour of traffic or if you get there in 10 minutes. It's wild. And I'm not exaggerating. Anyone that's watching this from Atlanta, please co-sign. And yes, it's true. And so looking at that, looking at the schools, if you have kids, and honestly, residential real estate is heavily dependent on school ratings, even if you don't have kids and even if you don't care. So that's a big thing, because it shapes, it's telling you a lot about the environment sometimes, about how the schools are funded, how the teachers are ranked, how kids are doing based on test scores, which may or may not even be, the right thing to focus on. But all these school rankings definitely play into real estate prices. And so if you do have kids, that's more reason why it should be important to you, whatever area you decide in as it relates to schools. And then lastly, I'll add support system. Is it near your support system, your family, your friends, whoever it is that you like to spend your time with? Is this house going to allow you to, not only get to work well, but get other places you need, grocery stores, healthcare, banks, those typical things that we all usually need for a living? Is it relevant and close to those areas? Also, I look at maintenance costs personally. Not a big thing for some people. My thing is, I already said I didn't want to mow any yards. So if I was getting my single family ranched out house, I wanted a little bit of land, just enough that if on the worst case scenario I had to mow it, I wouldn't be bent about it. And so although ranch house was my priority, my backup was, if I had to go townhouse route, it had to be an in unit. Don't want both people on my side. And that being one of the reasons, but also the other reason is because I really enjoy natural light. And when you get around and go to different houses, natural light may not be important to you, super important to me. But I've noticed with townhomes, the ones that are in the middle usually lack in natural light. And so usually the in units have the better natural light because they have more windows. And so those were kind of my deal breakers, on top of having a drive-in garage, not a carport, not a detached garage, but a garage that's attached to the house. So also something important to me is, I think about this when I'm carrying my groceries in the house and it's raining, am I getting wet? Very simple. Might be even, shallow to some of you, but that is important to me. If I'm carrying my groceries in the house and it's an inclement weather, am I getting wet? Are my bags getting wet? I'm not okay with it. So for me, having a garage was a deal breaker. So looking at all of those things. And so one thing I also want to add when I say determining house needs and what you can afford, HOA communities. Excuse me, HOA communities is another consideration. So typically in HOA communities, you will find that something may be covered. So whether it's yard maintenance or common areas, or it may have a clubhouse, a pool, a tennis court, something that you're paying for monthly that is for everyone's use in the community. So you have to decide, do you want to live in an HOA community? For me, there are certain things that I felt like a HOA are worth it if they're providing certain services, but I'm definitely not interested in having a HOA just for the sake of saying that someone's telling me what to do. And so, looking at the bylaws for any community that does have a HOA that you're considering living in, and if you don't mind abiding by said laws. And so one thing to know with HOAs, and not to get too heavy into it, because you may not even be looking at HOA communities, but in some instances, depending on the bylaws, like if you don't pay, HOAs can put an additional lien on your property. And so it's super important that if you are considering looking at HOA communities, that you evaluate everything about potentially living in the HOA community. Some of them are voluntary HOAs where you're not paying anything. You can pay if you want to. Everybody doesn't have to pay, but I look at how much are you getting accomplished if it's voluntary, if no one has to participate. So just evaluating all of those pieces when it comes to looking at your household needs. I like certain things to be taken care of for me. So I was okay with an HOA. Now, again, I was okay with a functional HOA, one that mows the lawn and, does stuff like that and tells people not to park in the middle of the street. I'm cool with that. Because, in some instances, they can preserve the value of your community as well when you look to sell later. And so, yeah, those are some big things. And that's not everything, but just looking at what you need from the house process. So next step is finding you a realtor. A good one, not just any old body that's advertising on Facebook, but a good realtor that has good recommendations, good reputation, that you can talk to and you feel comfortable with them. So I will tell you, I had 3 realtors. My first realtor was a recommendation by a friend, and I just didn't feel like he was super attentive. He was super knowledgeable now. He was knowledgeable. And so I felt confident in his information piece, but he wasn't super attentive. And so, I ended up terminating that relationship. No bad blood, but just wasn't what I needed at the time in that process. My second realtor, I did what I told you not to do. I found via Facebook, no personal recommendation. And we actually worked together for several months. That scenario, I think the communication piece for me, I felt like I was doing too much follow-up with, with the seller, and just, it was like, it was inconsistent. I guess I'll say that, because there were some instances where she was doing, a lot, but then other times I'm like, oh, have you heard from this? She's like, oh, well, let me check on it. And it's like, were you going to check on it if I didn't ask you about it? And so there was an instance with a new build ranch home that she told me she was going to check on, and come to find out she didn't check on it until they were out of that particular floor plan. And I ended up paying the same that I paid now that I would have paid then, but whatever. Third realtor, I took the advice I just gave you, and was a recommendation from a friend who had actually closed and had a successful buying experience with this individual. And she was actually very amazing. Our conversation really started off where she asked me, like, what did I expect of her? And I was like, okay. So, you like, for me, this is not a requirement of everybody, but it needs to be like we're dating. Like, what do you expect from me? What do I expect from you? And then we kind of meet in the middle to figure out what's practical, right? And so that's super important to me. And so, we were working together. We worked together for a month, and we got it done. And so for me, communication, timeliness, sincerity, all of those things are super important. So I just challenge you to think about, when you are looking for someone to represent you in the purchase of one of the biggest purchases that most people make in their lives, what qualities are important to you. Because it's a big deal. Next step, the obvious, find you a house. By far not the easiest step in this process. And so, but going back to all the other steps that we talked about, the find your house, I put them in this particular order because it's important now that you have your agent set up your searches based on some of those qualities that you're looking for: location, proximity, school, support system, type of house, deal breakers on the house, garages or not, basements or not, single level or not. So having your realtor go ahead and set up you some automated searches that are generating on a daily basis new houses that fit into the categorization that you're interested in. And so, so that way you go through and find your house. And so, biggest thing, because again, strong seller's market. I know I keep emphasizing it, but I'll tell you, I was looking to buy back in 2014 and it was nothing like this. So I want to emphasize strong seller's market. When you go to view a house, be ready to make a decision, because there's no coming back to look again. There's no coming back and bringing your mama and your daddy the second time. They need to be with you the first time. Anybody that is helping you make a decision, they need to be there, okay? Because that's how fast these houses are moving. I mean, literally, I've had houses where I'm like, the day of, she'll send me a listing, and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to look at this. And she'll go to try to confirm a showing. Oh, it's under contract. Just got posted that morning, under contract by lunchtime. I kid you not. And any realtor I think can back me up on this. I'm not making it up. And so with that, like I said, everybody that needs to be a part of this decision-making process needs to be physically present. And so with that, when you're putting in your offers, make sure you're putting in your strongest offer. So that's why going back to assessing your budget and what's your max, assessing like that max for that particular house, because your max for each house is going to be different. But that's why you need to know what your overall max is in the big grand scheme. Like, you don't want to go above this for any house, but then I'll call it a sub max based on the house, because you might not want to pay as much for, a 1,600 square foot house as you would for a 2,000 square foot. Why did I say 100? 2,000 square foot house. You might not want to pay the same price for those, but they should both fall under your max. But you might have a sub max where you pay less for the townhouse. The most you want to pay for that townhouse is this, and the most you want to pay for this 2,000 square foot house is this. And so when you're putting in your offers, it's very, very, very critically important that you're putting in your best offer. Like, what are you going to be comfortable with walking away with? And I'll tell you this, I just, going through this process, like I said, I started looking, so I did my pre-quals last March 2020. I started like physically looking like in May, June 2020. And I will say from then to now is even a huge change in that I go back, and of course I ask, like, what offer did they accept? Did they tell you? Oh yeah, they accepted an offer that was $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 over asking. Oh, okay. And I always ask because I like to reassure myself that I did my best in terms of making sure I got the house that I wanted. If I know I wasn't willing to put $20,000 out there, then I'm cool. That's fine. They chose the right person, because I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't willing to do that. So that's why it's important before you get into this game that you realize what you're willing to do. I wanted to add too that when you're finding your realtor, it's important to get your pre-qual first, because a realtor usually won't start dealing with you until they see you're pre-qualified, because that's a waste of their time. They don't get paid till they get you a house. The rest of that time is volunteer time, is public service, because if they never get you a house, or if you're not pre-qualified and they're working with you and you walk away and decide to work with someone else, or decide that you're going to wait, or that you can't get pre-qualified, they just gave you volunteer hours of their time. And so make sure you get that pre-qual before you're calling up and assessing realtors, because they're going to want to know that you're serious and ready to roll, because there are plenty of other people who are ready. So make sure you're ready before you utilize and waste someone's time, or use it very fruitfully and help them get paid. So not always waste. So closing day. Mine was a mess. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was a mess. It was a mess because the lender that I chose, that shall remain nameless, on the day of closing, I'm sitting outside of Navy Federal trying to do the wire, and I don't have wire instructions. And it was probably, at that point, it was like 2 o'clock, and closing was supposed to be at 3 o'clock. And this is in the middle of Brookhaven, traffic, okay, where I'm like, okay, I got to do this wire, and I still got to get to the house and do the walkthrough, and then make it to Alpharetta for the closing. So yeah, needless to say, yeah. But going forward, so the next step was I did the wire. I finally got the closing instructions. I did the wire into the account. And then I met at the attorney's office. No, I met my agent. We did the walkthrough. She beat me to the house. We did the walkthrough, which went good. And then we both headed over to the attorney's office. And so when we got to the attorney's office, the sellers, they had actually done their part already. They had actually signed everything they were supposed to sign, but they stayed at closing because they wanted to meet who was they wanted to meet me. And so we talked for a little bit before they called us back. And they call you back, big stack of papers, and you're going through signing, giving a drop of blood, signing, So like when I got in there, I said, do we have to make it through all of those? He was like, yeah, but it won't take long. And it didn't. Many of the documents were the same while I was signing duplicates. Or, you know, there was a contract for a contract for a contract type of thing. But it actually ended up going relatively fast. We were probably in there maybe 30 minutes, and that was with a couple questions and some conversation going around. And then with a little bit of conversation at the end after we were done signing. And so they give you your keys, your garage door opener, and all of that good jazz. And then you bid everyone adieu because you're now a homeowner. Everybody gets their money, everybody gets out of there, and it's like, all right, thanks, nice working with you. So the closing process for me was by far the biggest relief. I think because of the experience I had with the lender, it was anticlimactic, I suppose. So I had to literally just take that day. I didn't even, like, I got the keys and I did not go to the house that day after closing. I got the keys and I went, I said, I worry about that. I needed to rest and just debrief from the experience that I had over the past month. I had a 30-day closing, but it ended up being, I just closed on Tuesday, April the 20th. And so, and it was supposed to be Monday, April the 12th. And so we ended up having to do an extension on the agreement with the seller, and the 20th was literally the last day, and the seller could have walked from the transaction. So imagine that stress. And then the stress of the piece that was out of my control. It wasn't anything that I was missing or doing wrong. I think one part that I did miss, let's talk a little bit about the financial piece. And so, being as transparent as possible, I utilized my VA loan, Veteran Affairs, VA, for anyone that is not aware. And so with that, the incentive for me utilizing that was 0 down payment, so 100% financing available. Yes, I played my own closing costs, but that has to do with the market. You may be able to find some closing cost assistance programs, maybe. And then no PMI, no mortgage insurance is required with the VA loan. So that saves about probably like $200 a month over going conventional or FHA. What else? And lower interest rates, a little lower. I ended up closing in at 2.99%. Had I used one of the other lenders, I would have gotten 2.75. I will say that. So I did the math. It ends up being $34 more a month over the life of the loan. My friend did it for me. He was like, that's a lot of money. And I'm like, okay, calm down. So over 30 years, $34 a month ends up being $1,000 and $1,020. So that's contingent upon me actually taking the whole 30 and not paying quicker than that. So yeah, post-closing pieces that I want to add in here. And like I said, financial piece, do not go buy furniture before you close. You can do all that after. But things you have to do and consider too is the cost to move in. Are you hiring movers? Are you moving from far away? Or is it a move that you can do yourself right down the street? Because all of it costs money. Setting up utilities, converting them the same way you would an apartment, kind of. But now everything is totally your responsibility. Establishing your utilities at the new property. And then also buying new furniture because you may be in a bigger space than you were before. For me, I'm waiting until I move all the way in to see what I'm missing, kind of, and to buy stuff and to see what goes with the ambiance and the aura of the house before I go and purchase a ton of stuff. There are a couple things I know that I want, but outside of that, like when it comes to decor, I am waiting until I get in there good and solidly to decide. And so that was my home buying process in 2020 going into 2021. Overall, I'm very glad with my decision. My agent that I ended up closing with was amazing. Yeah, and if you need a recommendation for an agent, I got one because she was pretty great.
She just purchased a home. I'm so excited for her. Congratulations. Thank you, Dawn. You've been amazing. Oh, thank you so.
So if you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments. And again, I want to remind you that if you like content of this nature, I recommend that you subscribe. If you want to see more things like this in the future, I want you to like. And then if you feel like someone can find this useful, share. But have a good weekend and peace.